Hi everyone, Samir and Samet here, and welcome back to our Formula One podcast.
Today we'll be talking about the 2023 British Grand Prix.
Yeah, and I actually like this race a lot. Definitely something unusual that we've seen so far this season. Different drivers up in, let's say, out of positions normally than what we've seen before. So it was definitely a welcoming change.
Yeah, we this was a really interesting race. Obviously, like you said, there were so many people like
Yeah,
way higher up than we ever thought. And going into this weekend, the major thing was that Red Bull could tie McLaren's long-standing record of 11 wins in a row.
yeah,
That would obviously happen if Red Bull won the British Grand Prix this year, and that's a feat no one has even ever come close to recently, except
yeah,
actually Red Bull themselves in 2013.
yeah. So going now off, this would be into this race weekend. This was a normal 5 session weekend, no sprint or anything like that. So immediately going into FP1, we noticed that the Aston Martins were looking pretty quick too. The cars were just getting a feel for this new layout. There was a lot of hard tire running, just normal FP1 stuff.
Yeah, a lot of teams actually. I think almost all the teams, if not all of them, had brought upgrades, whether
Yeah.
they were like minor upgrades or major upgrades, like we saw in the
Yeah.
McLaren.
McLaren actually this weekend were running their new chrome livery, so it's kind of a throwback to their old chrome livery that they ran back in the day, but they still kept some of their papaya orange as well. So that was nice to see, and they also brought some major upgrades McLaren to the this week.
Another team that brought also some upgrades were Alex Albon and Logan Sargent's Williams team,
Yeah,
and they were also sporting a new livery for their 800th Grand Prix for the
yeah.
Williams team in Formula One.
It
So
was a nice livery. It had the Union Jack flag on the engine cover.
and Alex Albon looked well on the pace. He was
Yeah.
third fastest at the end of the day, so that Williams, once again in Alex Albon's hands, looked
Yeah.
extremely quick.
Yeah, and later on throughout the day too, we would see it's not just Albon too, but Sargent struggling a little bit in this session, but in other sessions he would definitely show himself.
hmm
Yeah,
And also in this session too, again the Red Bulls were looking consistently
yeah,
quick, but it looked like Sergio Perez also was in the mix too, as he hadn't been like we saw in previous races. He's been truly well out of his
yeah,
form, especially in qualifying. So it was good for Red Bull to see Perez up there, but then again it was just FP1 and we wouldn't know. Perez's struggles come in qualifying, obviously.
yeah. So at the end of FP1 there, it was a Red Bull 1-2 with Verstappen from Perez, although Perez was still 4 tenths off his teammate.
And even Verstappen was complaining a little bit that the car just had no grip, but that
Yeah,
was probably just because hard tires and a new like track without any rubber laid down or anything.
yeah. So then it was Albon in P3, really good from him, and then Alonso fourth, Leclerc fifth. So a pretty disappointing start to the weekend for Ferrari, 6 tenths off Verstappen when Verstappen's not even at full potential too. But maybe Leclerc is also not at full potential, and
Yeah.
Ferrari in general, because it was Ocon in P6, then Sainz in P7, Norris P8, Stroll P9, and then Oscar Piastri in P10.
Going into FP2 again, Alex Albon looked extremely quick in his
Yeah,
Williams, once again lighting up the timesheets. Albon was third fastest, but also on the other side of the garage, Logan Sargent put his Williams into fifth at
yeah,
the end of the day. So not just one, but both Williams had showed to have really strong pace.
yeah,
Obviously, we know Logan Sargent goes really well around Silverstone, having won
yeah.
the F2 feature race here last year.
And also winning in Formula 3 as well in 2020.
So he goes around this track really well, and it was good to see Sargent up there, and that gave hopes that maybe he could score his first ever Formula One points here.
Yeah, and much needed points too because he is one of those drivers too that just needs to deliver some good results now.
Yeah.
Same with Nick DeFries as well. I think it's just mainly DeFries and Sargent who are at risk of. I think they'll give Sargent another year. Red Bull is more. They're more likely to throw out someone rather than Williams.
hmm
So Max Verstappen once again too was just flying around Silverstone now on the soft compound of tires too during these quali like
Quali
runs,
runs,
and
yeah.
he was able to bag in a time of a 1:28.078, so a really quick time from Max Verstappen. And yeah, also the two Williams looking really good. with Albon in third, Sargent in fifth as well. Both of them on the soft tires too. So it's not like they were running on different tires. So it's not like they were running on like different tires and still being faster than other people. They were on the same tire.
Yeah, but another person too that looked really quick was Carlos Sainz in
Yeah,
his Ferrari. He was second, just 200s off Max Verstappen in his
yeah,
Red Bull. Sainz was looking really quick in the quali sims for Ferrari. Unfortunately, though, on the other side of the garage, Charles Leclerc would not be able to
yeah,
participate in this session because of electrical issues with his car, and so he lost a lot of valuable running. So we would
yeah.
see whether or not that would affect him in qualifying later.
Yeah, so also and later on Sainz also flying, Leclerc no running. We saw Lance Stroll too as well, having issues with his mirror. So
Hmm.
he was limping around the track with a broken mirror and he had his one hand covering the mirror so that it wouldn't fly away, but that delayed his progress.
Yeah, that was really strange to see. And
Yeah.
also on Alonso's car, he also had some problems. There was some debris that got caught up in his car,
Oh,
so he
yeah.
had to abort some laps so they could get that sorted out.
Yeah. Lewis Hamilton also was trying to find some form on a track that he is the most successful driver at in Silverstone, but he was only able to manage a time of P15 in FP2, so not exactly the start to the weekend that he was looking forward to.
Especially at his home race.
Yeah.
But in the end, it was Max Verstappen on top, and Carlos Sainz second, and once again Alex Albon third in the Williams, followed by Sergio Perez, and then Logan Sargent right there, albeit
Yeah.
4 tenths off his teammate, but still up there in fifth is really impressive.
Yeah.
Then Lance Stroll came sixth ahead of the Haas of Nico Hulkenberg. Then came Pierre Gasly eighth in his Alpine, and then Oscar Piastri ninth, and Fernando Alonso 10th.
Yeah. So moving on into FP3 the next day, immediately Charles Leclerc hit the track again running with a really positive result after he bagged the fastest time of the session in FP3 after losing out of course in FP2 with the electrical issue. He was definitely looking to make amends for that.
Mm. And also, again, though, we saw the Red Bulls, they seemed initially to be flying, but then towards the end, they sort of dropped off. But
Yeah.
maybe that's because they weren't, they just didn't want to use up all their new tires so they
Yeah.
could save it for qualifying in the race.
Yeah.
But Max Verstappen finished P8, and so that was really weird to see. 8 tenths off Leclerc, but Alex Albon once
I
again
know. Yeah.
delivering in P2, and Logan Sargent in P7. Sargent ahead of Verstappen.
Yeah. That's how you know definitely that the Red Bulls aren't trying.
Yeah.
But moving on, then Sargent also he had an issue even in his car too. He said something blew off and that was releasing a lot of hot air into his cockpit. So you could see on his onboard he was moving his hand to the other side so that because it kept all the hot air. Like he said it was hurting a lot. So that's not something good that he would need in qualifying.
There was also an unusual incident in the pit lane with Lando Norris as he pulled out of his pit box. The mechanics realized they left a cooling fan on the exhaust of his car, so he had to pull off to the inside of the pit lane so a mechanic could come running back down and grab it. But they would be have they were called to the stewards for that actually because that could have been pretty dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. Towards the end of the session, we saw some rain too, and then we saw the drivers fit on the intermediate tires to get some wet weather running because it would definitely carry over into qualifying the wet weather. So it would be good for them to get data and see some setup changes for the qualifying later on.
Because obviously, I mean, it was predicted to be a dry race, but at the same time, qualifying was predicted to be wet. So they had to like make that setup because during qualifying and the race, you can't change your car's setup
Yeah.
except like maybe front wing and small bits. So they would have to make that compromise between a wet qualifying and a dry race.
Yeah. So at the end of FP3, then it was Leclerc in P1, Albon in P2, Alonso P3, Gasly up there for Alpine
That
in
was a good
fourth.
result for Gasly.
Yeah, Hamilton in fifth too, rebounding after a difficult Friday. Sainz sixth, Sargent seventh, Verstappen eighth, although his time was set on the medium tires. George Russell ninth, and Yuki Tsunoda in 10th. Moving on into qualifying now. in Q1. We saw throughout the session the drivers now trying to improve their times in the soft tires. So it was a dry session as of now. And Lewis Hamilton we saw on the wet track sort of, but dry enough for dry tires. We saw him lose the car and spin it at the right before the final chicane into the gravel.
At turn 15, he just
Yeah.
turned the car and the rear end just stepped out and he spun around. So that was cold. That was probably
Yeah.
some cold tires.
He also
and
dipped a wheel into the wet part
the
of the
wet part of
track
the
too.
track, yeah.
But luckily he was able to keep going. But he stayed out for because he was too late to where he could go into the pit lane.
Mhm.
So he had to go around for another lap. But then with 3 minutes to go, Kevin Magnussen's Haas stopped at the exit of turn 15 and right before in front of the pit lane, but on the opposite side. And so like that brought out the red flag too.
And he couldn't cross over the track because that
Yeah.
would mean crossing over the racing line, which would be pretty dangerous.
Yeah, in a slow moving vehicle too. So that like everyone who was on the lap at that point had to abort their lap. And now as we saw before, this when the session was getting restarted, before that when the drivers would line up at the end of the pit lane, we saw Max Verstappen had broken his front wing surprisingly. And then we saw on the replay that he had actually understeered into the pit wall.
That was pretty funny to see.
Yeah.
Obviously not for Red Bull because they wasted a front wing with that. But Verstappen, what happened was basically the pit lane was still pretty wet because cars don't regularly run through that. And so Verstappen on his tires, he just turned the wheel and the car just went straight effectively. He just couldn't, the tires just weren't gripping to the track. And so he had to be careful about that on the next time.
Yeah, but they were able to get that issue fixed and continue on with the rest of the session too.
But after that, then it was almost all chaos as they were lining up at the end of the pit lane with Perez there. Perez had waited almost the entire red flag there, so his tires would have been stone cold as well as the two Williams. But Perez in the end, after he got out, it was almost like really close with the timing. But fortunately, he was able to get out.
Yeah, he was the first one at the queue too, so that meant that he would certainly have a slower time than those behind because the track would continue to improve, and so like he was definitely not in a good situation. So as the time went to zero, Perez went quickest by 7/10 of a second, but then Albon went quicker than Perez by 5/10 of a second. Then we saw Logan Sargent go up into second, so Perez was beaten by both Williams too. Sargent though 4/10 off his teammate. Then we saw the Alfa Romeo of Valtteri Bottas go up into P2 then and split the Williams. Joe went up to P5 behind Sergio Perez. So now the drivers were just trying to get their lap times in.
And the track was getting ever quicker.
Yeah, Nick DeVries went up to P6. Lando Norris blitzed the first sector, personal best in the middle sector, and he went into P1 by 5/10 of a second. So McLaren's were looking rapid, and Stroll also now to set his time went up to P2. So all this time Perez was just tumbling down the order, and there were still a lot more drivers to complete their times. Hulkenberg went up into P4, and then Sonoda went up to P10. So Perez was then Russell went up to P2. So Perez is continuously falling down the order as Verstappen and Hamilton went quicker than Perez. Then so did Ocon and the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz as well. And then Charles Leclerc went up to P2, making Perez the driver at risk. And then as Gasly went up to P8, Perez was knocked out of qualifying.
So a lot of drivers had improved so much, and Perez ultimately paying the price, as well as Nick DeVries again. DeVries disappointing in the Alpha Tauri, but Yuki Tsunoda would have been really mad about that because he seemed to have had the pace this weekend, but he got knocked out in Q1.
Yeah, we saw also at the end of Q1, Valtteri Bottas pulled his Alfa Romeo over to the side with a problem. So the 5 we lost from Q1 were Kevin Magnussen, Nick DeVries, Zhou Guanyu, Yuki Tsunoda, and Sergio Perez.
5 times in a row now, Sergio Perez has failed to miss Q3.
Yeah, has failed to make Q3. Yeah. And Logan Sargent, props to him, he made it into Q2 surprisingly.
Yeah, that's when you know that Perez is really struggling. I mean, 5 times in a row he's failed to make Q3, and in that RB19 with you see Verstappen doing all that on the verge of winning 11 races in a row.
Yeah.
Just that cannot be happening with Perez.
Yeah, so moving on to Q2 now, the sun was out and it was dry weather now for sure. Lando Norris towards the end, he was quickest ahead of Leclerc, who went up into P2. Then the Haas went to start his lap, and Carlos Sainz then went up into P2, so he was actually quicker than Charles Leclerc on this particular run. As then we saw Alex Albon now go up to P2, so again another super lap from Alex Albon, and Logan Sargent behind looked to join his teammate, but he could only muster a time up for P9 too, so that was not good enough time. He would certainly be at risk. Alonso then went up to P5, and Sargent went down to the driver at risk.
And Max Verstappen was absolutely flying
Yeah.
after that.
He was purple in the first sector, purple in the second sector, and personal best in the third as he went up comfortably into P1. And then Piastri went up to P2. So Piastri and Norris were all of a sudden out of nowhere looking super quick in both of their McLarens.
The McLarens were absolutely flying. We never
Yeah.
saw this in practice, as we saw Lance Stroll go up to P10 and knock Sargent out.
Yeah, so Sargent would have to wait for a Q3 appearance for him. Hulkenberg went up to P10 and knocked Stroll out of qualifying. And then Gasly then went
Ocon.
up to P9.
And Ocon couldn't make it either, so Ocon would be out.
Yeah, so Russell went up to P10, which or Gasly went up to P9, which meant Hulkenberg was knocked out of qualifying.
Yeah,
Yes,
so that was really a shame. I mean, we saw a lot of drivers we thought we would make it to
Yeah.
to Q3, but ultimately didn't. And we saw an incident between Esteban Ocon and Lance Stroll as Ocon dived down the inside at the
Yeah.
final chicane to start his lap, and that ultimately cost him because Stroll just switched back to him and got the exit, and Ocon had a flat spot on his tires, and he
Yeah.
started the lap a lot slower than he could have.
Yeah.
So that was just pretty bizarre and not good driving from Ocon there.
Yeah, so going into Q3 then, 8 minutes to go. These were their first time runs, I think, as George Russell went up to quickest, and then Lewis Hamilton then beat his teammate by 4 tenths. But then the Mercedes were split by Albon once again with a good lap, and Norris surprisingly with a time slower than the Mercedes, so he must have definitely made a mistake somewhere because Alonso was able to go up to P2. Verstappen by 6 tenths into the 127 zeros was quicker than Lewis Hamilton. Leclerc was 6 tenths off Verstappen in P3, and Carlos Sainz went to P4, which then became P5 as Oscar Piastri found a time to go up to P3.
But then again, all the drivers except Verstappen were on
Yeah.
on old tires. Verstappen was on new tires, so
Yeah.
that's what caused for the 6 tenths gap.
Yeah. So then, and Gasly completed his time as he was the last in the train. He went up to P8 as so he was found a semi decent time, but others behind would surely improve.
And in the end, though, like despite Verstappen having that new set of tires, the other drivers found significantly more pace
Yeah.
in their cars, and we would see just how quick Lando Norris actually was in that McLaren when he put the lap together.
Yeah, so on the final set of runs now, Charles Leclerc was surprisingly looking really quick after setting a purple first sector and a personal best second sector. He went up to the front row, just missing out on provisional pole, but there were still so many people behind challenging. Sainz went up to P3 provisionally after nailing the final sector. Then came the Mercedes of George Russell, who went up only into P4, so he couldn't beat the two Ferraris. Then Alonso went up to P5, so he missed out to George Russell.
That was
Hamilton
a surprise
then,
from Alonso. That was a surprise because normally we would see him go a lot faster.
yeah, then Lewis Hamilton was able to beat Alonso and go up to P5, and then Lando Norris came and crossed the line and went into provisional pole position. Out of nowhere, he went into provisional pole. And that was a super lap from Lando Norris, and the crowd you could hear absolutely erupted with everything. Then Oscar Piastri crossed the line to make it P3 for him, but there was still a Max Verstappen who was waiting to challenge behind. And after Verstappen, he wasn't looking on like he was a tidy lap. It was a personal best first sector, yellow second sector, which meant he didn't improve on his personal best, but he still found a lap together to go onto pole position for sure by 2/10 of a second. That was really good from him to claim pole.
Another really excellent final sector for Max Verstappen, like we saw in
Yeah,
Monaco. Albon could only manage eighth, so when we thought the Williams would be up there, it was
yeah,
actually the McLarens challenging the Red Bulls,
yep,
or actually the Red Bull because Perez was knocked out in
yeah,
Q1. And so in the end, it was Max Verstappen on pole position with Lando Norris P2 and Oscar Piastri P3 for the
yeah.
first time.
Piastri P3.
Yeah, so for the first time since Monza 2021, both McLaren started inside the top three, and everyone knows what happened on that weekend. So we were
Yeah,
all wondering if that could be a repeat for this year. And Charles Leclerc then came home fourth in qualifying ahead of Sainz. So fourth and fifth for Ferrari were not too
yeah,
bad because Mercedes were sixth and seventh, and Alex Albon was eighth. Alonso disappointing ninth for
yeah.
Fernando Alonso,
Not
and
good.
Pierre Gasly 10th in his Alpine.
Yeah. So moving on into the main race now, as this was looking like an exciting race with an exciting grid. Could Norris potentially win his home Grand Prix? Could Piastri get his first podium? It was time to find out. And as the lights went out, we saw an incredible reaction from Lando Norris too, and arguably even an even better one from Piastri behind. But Piastri was cut off by Norris. But Norris took the lead of the race from Verstappen, and Piastri tried to send it up the inside of Verstappen, but he hung it out. So Lando Norris led his home Grand Prix, but Verstappen was certainly fighting back, and he wasn't looking like he was going to give this one up. But then towards the first DRS zone, Piastri looked to have the better run, and Norris tried to weave to break the toe, but Verstappen was just following him, and so was Piastri as well.
Yeah, I just want to say too, before that, all chaos broke behind when Lando Norris led into turn three, as we saw Lewis Hamilton going wide, and then we thought
Yeah.
maybe George Russell would have a look at Charles Leclerc, and then also we saw one of the Alfa Romeos go wide too, and Sergio Perez was getting bogged down and all of
Yeah.
that. He lost a couple of positions
Logan
off
Sargent
the
went
start.
off too in that turn. He went off pretty wide.
So
But there was no contact. But then Norris then was just trying to keep his lead, and now it looked like towards Cops, Piastri would be able to challenge Verstappen. Piastri went to the inside at Cops. Verstappen though hung it around the outside, and Piastri just didn't have the confidence to make a move up there.
it's probably smart from Piastri. They
Yeah,
probably both saw what happened. Well, I know
yeah,
Verstappen saw what happened in 2021.
yeah.
Piastri definitely saw that, so it was sensible, especially on lap one, too.
Yeah, on lap 5 though, then we saw Max Verstappen getting the run on Lando Norris, and with DRS, he was able to make the pass and get up into the lead of the race again.
It was an easy move for Max Verstappen down the Wellington Straight, but also it
Yeah,
was really surprising and cool actually to see that Lando Norris held that lead for so long, and not only
yeah,
that, but Oscar Piastri had kept in touch with the Max Verstappen, so that was really interesting to see both McLarens looked like they could properly challenge Verstappen today.
yeah. On lap 7 too, then we saw the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton closing up to the rear wing of his former teammate Fernando Alonso, and he was able to get the move into the turn after the DR Wellington straight, and he was able to get that position. As we saw Sergio Perez get past Kevin Magnussen after Magnussen locked up, and Perez with an opportunistic move went down the inside right before the Wellington straight. But as he cut across Magnussen, he broke the front wing end plate, and so that caused damage to Magnussen's front wing, which allowed Sargent to get through.
Yeah, I
Then
mean, it was all obviously an opportunistic move from Sergio Perez, and then
yeah,
also we saw Nick De Vries into turn 15. He understeered into a Haas
yeah,
and made contact and caused a puncture with it. And De Vries also broke some of his front wing. So again, De Vries making mistakes.
yeah. On lap 31, we saw George Russell try to get to the inside of Charles Leclerc at the end of the Wellington straight, but he tried to switch it and go around the outside of the Ferrari, and he was able to do it after a really nice move on the run down the old pit straight. So that was a really good move from him. Leclerc tried to fight back again, but just didn't have the grip or the straight line speed to get back at him.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen someone go around the outside at turn 7 for a while. So that was
Yeah.
really good from George Russell, obviously using the new tires to his advantage.
Yeah, on lap 33 too, we saw now the Haas of Kevin Magnussen, who had an issue in qualifying. His engine went at the lap 33, and there was smoke pouring out of the back of his Haas, and that brought out the virtual safety car at first, which then turned into the full safety car. Then we saw drivers rushing into the pit lane, including Norris, Hamilton, Alonso, and a lot of people rushed in to make their pit stops.
Yeah, I mean, it was smart from the FIA to make that a full safety
Yeah.
car because the car was so far out into the track that a virtual safety car wouldn't have even been safe enough. So, good thing that the FIA actually made this a proper safety car. One
Yeah.
thing on the pit stops too, we saw a lot of some teams going on new tires and a lot of teams going on scrubbed soft tires.
Yeah.
So it wasn't. They put both McLarens actually on hard tires though,
Yeah.
while everyone else went on to medium or soft tires. And because of this pit stop, the sequence of the safety car, Piastri had actually pitted one lap before the safety car, and Hamilton stayed out.
Yeah.
So because of that, Hamilton actually jumped Oscar Piastri onto the podium places, and so that was really disappointing for Piastri, who
Yeah.
now had a tough task ahead of him of getting past Lewis Hamilton. But on the restart, Hamilton was right at the heels of Lando Norris.
Yeah, Verstappen had already broke an intense gap ahead of Norris, and Hamilton on the soft tires looked to challenge Norris down the Wellington straight, and Norris pulled across aggressively and to try to cut off Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton tried to go around the outside at turn 7 and switch it back, and then to go around the outside, but he just didn't have the grip as Norris forced him wide. And then Hamilton on the run down the old pit straight tried to go around the outside of Norris, but Norris held his ground aggressively, and Hamilton had to watch out because Piastri would start to close up.
Yeah, it's sensible from Hamilton to back out of that. But then
Yeah.
I think after he backed out of that, he just never had the he just
Yeah.
never got close enough to the McLaren until lap 40, where he tried the same thing again but this time to go on the inside
At
turn
Cops, yeah.
he tried to go on the inside at turn 7, and through turn 8 and the old pit straight they were going wheel to wheel, and eventually Hamilton thought he could go on the inside at Cops, but Norris again shut
Yeah.
him off.
And on lap 43 now, we saw Sergio Perez right behind Carlos Sainz towards the chicane. Perez sent it up the inside of Sainz. Of course, Perez on the softs, Sainz on the hards. Perez then with a lovely switchback through the final corner, and he was able to get past Carlos Sainz, who is now being put under pressure from Alex Albon, who went up the inside of the Ferrari at turn 1, and Albon making a statement in the Williams, getting ahead of the Ferrari, who is now being put under pressure from his teammate Leclerc, who went around the outside of turn 3, and a lovely move from Leclerc to go around the outside of his teammate, similar to what he did to Gasly in 2019, if you remember that. But now Sainz was just under pressure from everyone behind, because you had the likes of Stroll, Gasly, and Sargent and Bottas also are right behind him.
And then on lap 45, we saw Gasly do what Russell did, and
Yeah.
Gasly went around the outside of Sainz at turn 7. So
Yeah.
another really good move from Pierre Gasly to get ahead of the Ferrari, who is now Carlos Sainz was massively struggling on his tire.
Yeah, but Sainz challenged Gasly all the way to Copse, and eventually went down the inside again of Pierre Gasly at Copse and reclaimed the position. But then on lap 46, we saw Gasly struggling, and after a replay, we saw Stroll had made contact with him at the final chicane after going off the track and rejoining. He actually hit the Alpine of Gasly, and then that invited Logan Sargent to go through, but that also invited the FIA to give Lance Stroll a 5-second time penalty.
That was really dangerous from Lance Stroll. I mean, he went off the track and then proceeded to rejoin and hit
Yeah.
Gasly. He also did that in Monza 2019, remember?
Yeah.
When he had to rejoin the track after Vettel forced him off.
Yeah.
And he hit Gasly
Yeah.
again. So, unfortunate for Gasly, that completely ruined his race. He was on for a really good
Yeah.
finish. But
And it was disappointment for Alpine in general because Ocon was having a mare of a race as well.
and then Ocon eventually retired too. So
Yeah.
that was double disaster for Alpine. Just really bad driving from Stroll in
Yeah.
that moment.
On lap 46, we saw Sergio Perez challenging the Aston Martin of Fernando Alonso, and he got up the inside on down the hanger straight. He was able to get past Fernando Alonso. On lap 52, then Max Verstappen controlled this race after the safety car restart, and he won the British Grand Prix for the first time, his second win at Silverstone, but his first official British Grand Prix win. Then Lando Norris came home for an incredible P2 for McLaren and his first career podium at his home Grand Prix for him. And Lewis Hamilton for, I don't even know what podium at Silverstone,
I think
but
he was like 14th.
14th podium at Silverstone, but another strong drive in 2023 for Lewis Hamilton to claim a podium. But give some credit to the man behind, Formula 3 champion, Formula 2 champion. Definitely after this result, future F1 champion Oscar Piastri, just a second behind Lewis Hamilton, within a second behind Lewis Hamilton.
It was a really impressive drive from Piastri, and
Yeah.
unfortunately his podium got taken away. But if McLaren keeps this pace up, then I have no doubt he's going to be on the podium soon.
Yeah. Then it was George Russell who came home in P5, Perez 6th, Alonso 7th, Albon scoring massive points again for Williams, Leclerc 9th, Sainz 10th. A pretty poor performance from Ferrari to end up from 4th and 5th on the grid, I think, to P9 and P10.
Williams scored more points than
Yeah.
Ferrari. Alex Albon by himself scored more points than Ferrari this weekend. So that was really big disappointment from
Yeah.
Ferrari. But also credit to Logan Sargent, who
Yeah.
because of Lance Stroll's penalty, he was able to finish P11. So he was
Yeah.
so close to points, and it's good to see Sargent keeping progressing, getting faster and faster every weekend.
Yeah, P11 too is his best result in F1. So with that 5 second penalty from Stroll, Sargent was up to P12, and I think also Lance Stroll went further down the order because at the end of the race, because the field was so close after that safety
finished
car
14.
restart, yeah, he went down from P11 to P14. So that was not good at all from Lance Stroll. And so Bottas was promoted to P12 and Nico Hulkenberg was promoted to P13. Yeah, so that was it for a crazy, crazy British Grand Prix. Thank you guys for listening to this episode of our podcast. And be sure to join us next time as we take a look at the 2023 Hungarian Grand Prix. Thank you.